So hi everyone, my name is Bethany Fincher. I'm one of the curators with Saatchi Art, and joining me here today is my colleague and fellow curator for this exhibition, Aurora Garrison. Hi everyone. We are so excited to present these artists to you today at this exhibition, and the artists featured are very near and dear to our hearts. So we're very excited to share it with you. So to get us started, we and Saatchi Art are very proud to present Major Figures. This is our survey of contemporary figurative painters, highlighting artists on Saatchi Art who approach their subjects and mediums in bold ways with references, reverence, or criticism to the art historical canon, combined with their own fresh perspectives. So a long-standing subject in the history of painting, representations of the figure were actually largely considered passé by the 20th century, at which point many avant-garde artists opted for abstraction as a means of challenging tradition. Of course, pop art brought figures back to the fore and to the center of the conversation through stylized portraiture and appropriated images from mass media that function to reflect and critique consumer culture. Then, of course, neo-expressionism saw the reemergence of the emotive dimension of the figure, with artists using crude and gestural painting techniques to paint evocative characters on the canvas. And so then by the late 20th century, many artists outside of these movements returned to the canvas to represent the figure and with it contemporary issues. Today, artists use figurative painting to explore their own personal identities, to relay new narratives, and push the boundaries of representation. And many of them are drawing on the visual culture and color palettes of the digital age, as well as visual traditions past. And so, of course, also, as such a time-honored tradition, figurative painting's place in our historical canon can't easily be ignored, and its history of exclusivity. So in turn, many of these artists draw on and critique historical modes of figuration to speak to the present. So I do want to note that we are going to be highlighting 10 of the 40 artists that are featured in this exhibition today between Aurora and myself. You can use the chat feature to drop in any questions that you have throughout the talk, and we will return to those and do a Q&A at the end of the presentation. I do want to note too, before we delve into our highlights, that if you're familiar with Saatchi Art and many of our initiatives, then you will likely see that there is a strong overlap between the artists that are featured in this exhibition and some of the artists that have been highlighted in our annual Rising Stars reports in recent years. If you aren't familiar, Rising Stars is the most prestigious feature that we offer to recent graduates of BFA and MFA programs around the world. And we found that many of them are figurative painters and are interested in exploring the figure in new ways. So we think figuration is a very important subject today. And of course, there's also been a resurgence in interest in figurative painters in the art market as well. So yes, we will be highlighting 10 out of 40 of the featured artists. We're very proud of the entire group. And again, we're happy to take questions after the highlights. Additionally, Aurora, myself, and our entire curatorial team can be reached at curator@saatchiart.com if you have questions after the exhibition or while you're exploring the show yourself. So to get us started, let's see if I can slide through here. This. All right, wonderful. Well, the first artist that I would love to introduce to you all today is Kylie Smith. He was actually one of this year's 2021 Rising Stars. And we're very excited about his work. He is currently based in Amsterdam, and he was raised between there and Australia. And his current work draws on his own childhood and his experience growing up in inner city communities and the culture of inner city youth today. And so he's very interested in giving faces and representation specifically to the children who might grow up surrounded by crime and who as a result are often incriminating themselves and may not have a voice themselves. So as you can see, based on his style alone, he's very interested in conventions from throughout art history, from history painting to battle scenes. He's also specifically interested in the Dutch Golden Age period from the 16th to 17th century, which was a time of economic opulence, military power, which of course was reflected in the paintings of the time. But of course, at this time as well, many painters, most notably Vermeer, you might recognize, depicted middle-class life and servants' quarters and mundane, everyday scenes that had previously been unrepresented throughout much of modern painting. So Kylie is very much working in this lineage of giving representation to previously underrepresented subjects. And in doing so, he represents these kids with resilience and strength and swagger and emotional complexity. And these are also all in a very grandiose scale. He works on oversized canvases, and he has a very distinct style that we're very excited about. So he earned his MFA from Parsons, and his recent honors include he was recently shortlisted for the Royal Award in Modern Painting that is presented by the King of the Netherlands, and he is also exhibited internationally. So on that note, I'll turn it over to Aurora to introduce our next artist.
Thank you. For all the artwork listings, you'll be able to see the dimensions underneath it in case anyone is curious. So Anna Wherewine is another of our rising stars from this year. She is a painter based in Columbia, Missouri, where she is assistant professor of painting and drawing at the University of Missouri. Anna received an MFA in drawing and painting from the University of Tennessee. And the two paintings I'll highlight today, like many other of Anna's paintings, depict scenes from daily life, from cozy moments at home to late night hangouts with friends. So do you want to go to the next slide?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
That's okay.
I have the power here.
Yeah. In Face Painter 2, the artist plays with unexpected patterns. Face Painter 2, by the way, is the one on the right. I don't know if I said painter correctly. Face Painter 2 is the one on the right. Anna plays with unexpected patterns, chromatic colors, and unconventional angles that enliven this casual moment between two friends. Her intense fields of color spread across the entire composition, and the flattened foreground and background create this sense of unity between the people and their surroundings. The vivid, outlandish colors and hues draw our attention to this commonplace interaction and allow us to slow down and really enjoy this everyday encounter between these two friends. The figures in Anna's paintings appear incredibly comfortable and relaxed, which also allows us to further share in this intimate moment with them. In the bathers on the left, Anna again approaches her subjects from a striking angle and perspective. With the figures filling up most of the foreground, the painting creates an illusion of closeness and trust that immediately pulls us into this intimate space again between two friends. The visuals of the painting itself are incredibly enticing, with rich pinks, deep blues, and acidic greens in the background. The colors, along with the depiction of these women in everyday scenes, celebrate female agency and domestic spaces as sites for creativity and community. And that's all I have on Anna.
Yeah, and I think that her sort of inversion of women typically as, you know, objects of the male gaze and as muses throughout art history.
Yes, I think
work too. Yeah.
Yeah, all her paintings depict women and kind of them in these intimate scenes together, hanging out or in whatever way by a lake.
Yes, we're very excited about her work as well. We're probably going to say that about every artist that we feature here.
That's why we chose them.
So our next artist that I would love to highlight is Abigail Ivono Payton. She is an Afro-Filipino artist based in Laguna Beach. She just recently earned her BFA, and she is working predominantly in realism. And in doing so, she's contemplating the historical conventions of portraiture and the history of Eurocentricity that comes with portraiture throughout much of the art historical canon. So she's, in a way, reclaiming these tools of representation to represent her own community and issues that she encounters in her own personal life. Particularly, her recent work delves into the natural hair community, which is a community among women of color that sort of emerged to promote solidarity in the face of pressure to conform to white standards of appearances. And of course, like any sort of community, it also comes with its own sort of internal social norms and pressures. So it's a very complex and contemporary issue that she's hashing out through her figures on the canvas. So another thing that I love about her work is her ability to sort of vacillate between these very confrontational portraits, like we see her on the right, along with these very quiet moments, like we see her on the left. And there's in each approach to the scene and to the figure is just packed with meaning and symbolism, I think. For instance, here on the left, Path to Resilience. It's a very weighty title in itself, but we're looking at a very mundane action. It's the scene between a little sister combing her older sister's hair. But of course, with the title and of course the large scale that she's having us view and insert, and that she's inserting us into the scene with, makes us contemplate how something as easily taken for granted as our hair or aspects of our appearance do form such a central part of our identity, and can also be very much a rite of passage and learning from your family and your community how to manage your hair, manage your appearance, and all the implications of that. So then in contrast on the right here, she's delving into the same issues in a very confrontational way with a very confrontational title. This is called The Big Chop. The Big Chop referring to this moment in the natural hair community of this act of chopping off your hair that's all been treated with chemicals and heat to allow your natural hair to come in. So the very act of separating yourself from a physical part of yourself indicates this moment of rebirth. It's a very emotionally charged and symbolic event. And I love that she's giving representation to these very particular issues that bear on her personally. So again, she recently earned her BFA and she has exhibited regularly in Los Angeles, and she's been featured in the LA Times. And definitely for such a young artist, she has a very strong command of realism in the figure and emotional nuance in her subject's gaze. So we're very excited about her work again. So thank you, Aurora. I'll let you introduce the next artist.
Okay, our next is Jay Chung. He received a BA in architecture and engineering before going on to earn a BFA from Tufts University in Boston. Jay was born and raised in Seoul, South Korea, and is now actually based in Dallas, Texas. Can you go to his artworks? Thank you. Jay challenges these conventional representations of the human figure through these fantastical, highly distorted and bodily forms. Jay's compositions operate on the psychological plane, subverting visual expectations and prompting viewers to tap into their unconscious interpretations of these forms. With an interest in altered states such as dreaming, Jay ultimately explores subjective experience through surrealist imagery and unexpected juxtapositions. In his most recent series, you'll see two paintings from this most recent series. Jay focuses on creating figurative forms that defy a conventional representation of the body and present an alternative that is centered on an unconscious interpretation around the world, of the world around us, sorry. Like a contemporary and more lighthearted Francis Bacon, Jay's figurative paintings have us question the relationship between our own physicality and our imagined life. This most recent series takes on philosophical ideas as well to analyze subject-object dichotomies and dualistic thinking. Like Bacon, Jay's compositions focus on the human form, often unrecognizable, and create a sense of uncertainty and strangeness. So he's definitely, I think, the artist among our 10 today that is kind of the most surreal in his forms, because they're always often hidden and distorted and you can't really quite tell, and your imagination kind of takes over. But I think that's what he wants ultimately. And I just really enjoy them. Again, you'll see like the one is 38 by 52 and the other one is 36 by 50. So really large paintings. I'm sorry we can't show ourselves next to them to give you an idea of scale, but Jay actually recently exhibited at the other art fair in Dallas. So if anyone in Texas should go see what the next fair in Dallas, his paintings in real life, it's they're quite spectacular. Yeah. You next, Bethany.
Yeah, and I think large scale.
It's a big
such a
part
basic
of
component, but I think that it's something that carries through a lot of these artists' work and just shows
definitely
how boldly they're approaching their figures. So
hence major figures.
Exactly. So our next artist is Benjamin Stevenson, who's also one of our Rising Stars artists from the Sears Report. He's a British artist who has been living and working in Colombia and Mexico. I believe he is still based in Mexico at the moment. And so his work really revolves around his own identity as a white male artist navigating a new culture. And with that, he's interested in deconstructing the history of colonialism and resultant themes of voyeurism and the notion of the exotic that have largely driven the Western canon, specifically in the primitivist, symbolist, and naive art movements of the late 19th century that were associated with artists including Gauguin and Henri Rousseau. Gauguin, of course, you might recall, is well known for his many French Polynesian expeditions and his paintings of the women there. Rousseau, on the other hand, actually never even left his native France. But of course, he was famous for painting these incredibly vivid and colorful and highly detailed exotic landscapes that were in fact very imaginative, considering that he never even left his native country. And it really just goes to show the fervor for exploration and the stories and the mythology of these other landscapes that dominated this very imperial time period. So that is that's the history that and the lineage that Ben is drawing on with his current practice. And he's combining that with deep research to uncover universal threads between cultural symbols. Go into these artworks. In these two works on the left here, he's examining this archetype of the trickster, which is something that sort of evades our perception, can take on different forms, and is something that represents an intermediary between the physical plane and the spiritual world. And of course, I think as something that evades physical forms and something of a trickster, I think you could read that as an autobiographical component of Ben's work as well. But anyway, he's exploring the universality of this archetype. Here it appears as a Mesoamerican ritual vase, but of course the concept of the trickster also appeared in mythology from ancient Rome, also in Navajo culture. So he's very interested in this, in the historical assumption of unidirectional looking that comes with the white colonizer versus the colonized. So he's very much turning that unidirectional looking on its head, also parodying it in some ways. Here on the right, we see him deconstructing a subject that we see throughout art history, and that is the female nude, of course. So again, he's sort of challenging himself to deconstruct the male gaze and deconstructing this female nude. And I think that it's actually something that's quite brave and bold for him to do as a white male artist himself. And it's interesting for you as a viewer to consider as well how far he can go with this endeavor and how successful he is, and for you to critique that and consider your own assumptions about it as well. So I think that it is a very brave endeavor on his part, and Again, he is also working on a very large scale, like many of these artists, and he holds a BA in painting from Wimbledon College in London, and he has exhibited his work internationally since then. So, Aurora, I'll let you take our next artist.
Our next is Barry Johnson, who's actually been on Saatchi Art for a very long time. He's one of the originals, so we love highlighting him. And he's exciting because he never does the same thing twice, and he takes a lot of pride in that. We never really know what he's going to come up with next. But anyways, he's a multimedia artist, and he's based in Seattle, and his art practice explores multiple modes of storytelling using these unconventional mediums. His artistic influences include Basquiat, again, Francis Bacon, and Marina Abramovic, as well as the soul music of his youth in the 80s and 90s. Barry is a self-taught artist who was born and raised in Kansas. After graduating with a degree in business marketing, he relocated to Seattle. He decided to become a full-time artist after he became disillusioned with clients in the tech industry who only wanted design work that was more of the same, rather something new and different. His work is spread across several mediums, including portraits, photography, installation, sculpture, and performance art. Barry paints purely with house paint when he does paint, and often incorporates 3D objects such as shards of broken glass or duct tape that add a lot of grit, tactility, and personality to his work. The two pieces that I'm going to show here today of Barry's portraiture series display a unique range of techniques, because that is kind of his MO. Elements of collage are mixed with these stoic faces and partially obscured figures that are then embellished with these bold strokes, shapes, and colors. And this really imbues each of his characters with a certain kind of presence and strength that I really enjoy and look forward to seeing. The duality between the sober expressions of the figures and the bold colors on the canvas is the artist's pointed reminder to the audience that the contributions of artists of color are vast and yet rarely acknowledged. Barry has actually been busier than ever since last year and has created murals and other narratives to uplift Black voices in the Pacific Northwest. So he's doing a lot of really important and creative work, and we're glad to see him take on so many projects. But yeah.
Thank you. Let's see. All right, so our next artist is Lizzie Wortham. She's a painter based in St. Paul, Minnesota. She is also with, like a few of these artists, she's exhibited with our art fair, the other art fair, quite frequently. She holds an MFA from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And Lizzie is very interested in Judith Butler's idea of gender performativity, wherein gender is conceived of as a learned act or performance that we are socialized into through repeated learned behavior, rather than something that is biologically or predetermined at birth. So this is a common thread, a common conceptual thread throughout her work, where she paints young women who are exploring their identity, literally, as we see here on the left, literally trying on and performing different personas. And I think that she captures the awkwardness of growing up, which is what I really love about her work. She doesn't shy away from that. I think that here on the left, we see in the performer, we see this young woman who, between the clown makeup, between the mirrored image to her right and between the phone, she's very conscious of this process of her being an object that she knows she is looked at, that she knows people are looking at, and then looking at herself being looked at essentially through the mirror and through the phone. And so I think that Lizzie is breaking down that process in an interesting way. She also explores young women exploring social norms and power dynamics in this work on the right entitled Camp. This is a very interesting painting with an interesting story behind it. It's actually based on a photo that Lizzie herself took when she was a young girl away at sleepaway camp in the I believe in the late 1970s, when she overheard this, or she saw this fight happening in the woods between a clique of girls that had formed over the course of the camp versus another group of girls. And so Lizzie was, hiding behind some trees, and she discreetly snapped a photo of it. And she described the experience as it's a very traumatic and scary experience, as you know, that how dynamics with young girls can be. So much so that the memory stuck with her, and she revisited it on canvas on a very large scale decades later. And so I think that she's pulling out, in this scene, she pulls out the ambiguity, the universality of that experience, and the tension in it too. And of course, I think that formally speaking, her painting style with these very loose and painterly brushstrokes, she creates these ambiguous scenes that lend themselves to universal interpretations and to us relating to them. And I think that they do that by sort of evoking the process of memory and the breakdown of memory through the haziness of the images that she captures. And of course, like I mentioned too, she captures the awkwardness as well in an unabashed way. So that's why we're really excited about her work in particular as well. So Aurora, I'll let you take us on to the next artist.
I really love the camp painting. I feel like it speaks to
it's a bit eerie,
a lot of women. Like I don't know. I feel like I've definitely been in a similar situation at some point in life. Our next artist is Therese Mole. She has a background in the fashion industry, and her portraiture involves carefully styled and positioned models that are often left undressed or exposed to express vulnerability and nostalgia. Therese attended the University of Iowa and graduated with a degree in English literature, and then moved to New York City to study at the New York Studio School. Therese grew up on a farm in Iowa and was surrounded by her mother's surreal oil paintings and her grandmother's impressionist still lifes. With these influences, she began to cultivate her own style, which largely is comprised of large-scale portraits, again, and still lives in oil. Her Caravaggio-esque large-scale portraits experiment with intense displays of shadow and light as a means of portraying how we present ourselves not only to the world, but to ourselves and what we choose to hide and to reveal. Therese believes that the making and consuming of portraiture is an extremely intimate experience, a time when both the artist and the sitter are seen clearly and can reveal each other's hidden strengths and greatest weaknesses. While most of her portraiture depicts family and friends, both of her still lives and portraits have become autobiographical in a way, and in extensions of herself and her relationships. Among other projects, Therese has been working with the Voices mural project in Iowa that includes multiple murals by regionally and nationally known painters. And I really wanted to highlight this too, even though it's not quite on track with our major figures, just because I thought it was really exciting and I wanted to show the other aspect of her work, which it's very much portraiture and still lives. And in this mural here, you'll see that Therese painted it on the Thomas J. Mole building, which is actually named after her great-great-grandfather who built it in 1915. To honor her family, she painted this still life depicting items often seen in her grandparents' home. And you can see a book, a glass of whiskey, and her grandfather's initials are engraved on that glass of whiskey, a cigarette, and a daylily. But yeah, just an amazing mural. And like Barry, they're both doing a lot of mural work, which is only natural when they regularly work on these large scale canvases to just go bigger and bigger.
Yeah, it's an exciting project for her.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, this is the last artist that I'll be highlighting for you all, Francisco GomezBiffle. He is an artist based in Santiago, and I'll go ahead and do the work that we're highlighting here in this exhibition. So he uses realist conventions combined with subjects and sensibilities very native to the pop art movement. A recurring scene and motif that you'll see throughout his work are the car crashes throughout a lot of his paintings. And of course, who else is known for using car crashes as a recurring motif? That would be Andy Warhol. And so I think that Fernando is very much working in this lineage of pop art, following Andy Warhol. And in this painting in particular, Autophoto or Selfie, he's very much commenting on the sort of bacchanalia and moral abandon of contemporary consumer culture today, wherein tragedy and death are so often taken for granted as a result of being divorced from their context, and of course as a result of us being constantly inundated with images, particularly in the wake of social media, which is something that, you know, has blown up even since Warhol's time, since Warhol was first confronting these themes in a very major way. So of course, this is also a time when sensational stories, what is real and what isn't, is increasingly unclear. And all of these factors really create a recipe for the consumer of these stories and these ideas and these images to place themselves and ourselves at the center of the story, for us to be the ones taking the selfie and putting us at the center of the story. And so I think in that respect, his work too also raises interesting ethical questions between individual responsibility, the individual responsibility of this woman who is nonchalantly taking a selfie of herself versus how much of it is an ingrained just fact of the human condition today. So I think that he's examining those sorts of issues and questions in a very tongue-in-cheek way, and of course, like I said, in a way that really harkens back to pop art. So we're very interested in his work as well. And again, he is based in Santiago. He is exhibited internationally, and his work is held in collections around the globe, including in the US, Europe, and in China, where he completed a residency a few years ago. So on that note, I'll let Aurora take us to our final artist.
I really love his pieces. We should have showed more. They just get better.
They're a lot of fun.
And he does plane crashes too. They're very dramatic.
He'll have to explore his portfolio, everyone.
Yes, do that, please. The last artist that we'll highlight is Rocha Navarro, and with her minimal color palettes and her figures set against, move on to the images, thank you. With her figures set against these solid backgrounds, Rocha's paintings captured the strength and solidity of her female subjects. She received her BFA in graphic design and animation from the University of Monterrey in Mexico. She's also exhibited her work in Mexico and France, and she now resides in France. For me, Rocha's large-scale portraits are similar to the presence and solidity that are found in the figures of Diego Rivera's murals and paintings. Like the famous Mexican painter before her, Rocha draws upon modernist painting styles to render these kind of heroic visions of women that I just love. Her works are divided into two distinct themes. The first is the portrayal of women and landscapes from her native Chihuahua, Mexico. Rocha also depicts the Ramuri people, an indigenous group that lives in northern Mexico. Rocha's work is centered on identity, and by representing these images of women, she searches to understand social categories and the way they are influenced by our modern day societies. She also explores the notions of perceived inherent values that are embedded in the Latina identity. I think her portraits of women are important to include in this exhibition because they remind us of the other whose presence is both familiar and challenging. And they're just amazingly large scale. You know, you have this woman who's almost like your size. Again, that's why they kind of remind me of Diego Rivera's mural paintings, which of course are just gigantic. And you get the same kind of presence that this figure is right there with you, and which is really powerful. And I guess that concludes our talk for our major figures exhibition. This piece actually sold this week by Rocio, which is pretty exciting, to a collector near Seattle, Washington. Please explore the rest of the artists in this exhibition. We'll share out the show page later today, I'm sure.
Yes, yeah, you'll be getting an email with a direct link to the exhibition shortly after this. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat box. We can hang out for a minute or so here. I also want to point out again that Aurora and I and the entire curatorial team are available at Curator@SaatchiArt.com. I'll say that a little slower because I realize I talk fast. That's Curator@SaatchiArt.com. If you have any questions as you're browsing this exhibition on your own, or if you'd like to purchase any of the works, see additional photos or information on any of them or the artist, we'll be more than happy to assist. And of course, if you aren't familiar as well, we also offer an art advisory service, which you can find on the Saatchi Art homepage, Art Advisory, where you can work with us one-on-one and we can help you find works for your art needs.